Can you imagine going on a road trip for 26 years?
Let's talk about that.
Good mythical morning.
Let's talk road trips today.
Let's talk road trips, man.
I am a fan of road trips. I think you are too.
I
hope you are, because we've
been on some.
We've been on quite a few road trips.
Quite a few.
Over the course of our friendship, and they're always a great way to create shared experiences, to see new parts of the country or the world, and to forge new layers of friendship along the way.
Yeah, take it deeper.
And we actually invited you guys to be part of our road trip experience when we did the mythical road trip, when we moved from North Carolina to Los Angeles back in 2011. You can watch that on our Rhett and Link channel.
And so it begins.
The mythical road trip with Rhett and Link. I'm Link.
I'm Rhett. We only went about 2,500 miles.
Right.
And it took about 5 or 6 days.
6 days-ish.
Yeah.
Right.
What if I told you that you could go many, many thousands of miles and take 26 years to go on a road trip? Would you be into that?
I might start to think about road trips differently. So I think that's the operable question today, is examining a case study in epic road tripocracy.
Epic road trip
Epic road tripocracy.
Back in 1990.
And see what we conclude.
Back in 1990, a man named Gunther Holdorf from Germany, he was an executive, former executive at Lufthansa, German airline. He quit his job in 1988, and then he started his road trip in 1990. He decided, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take a road trip around Africa, and I gotta have a woman to go with me, of course. So he put out an ad in a German newspaper, classified ad. This woman ended up being his fourth wife, Christine.
Well, that's sweet.
They didn't get married
Did it say, want to travel Africa with a dude who just retired from a German airline?
If it did, she probably had a lot of takers. Even though he was 53 and she was 34, she signed right up, buddy. So if you're in your mid-50s and you want to take a 34-year-old woman on a road trip, Craigslist. She was so into this idea that she dropped her kid off at boarding school, something I think about all the time.
Ouch. This goes out to people, including your own children. You realize that, right?
Set out on an 18-month road trip to see everything that Africa had to offer.
So they got into a 1988 Mercedes G-Wagon that they called Otto.
That's a nice vehicle.
That's a nice German name too, Otto. I didn't know that G-Wagon was the official name. I just thought that was like what people called it,
short
like slang.
For a very long German word that I can't pronounce.
No, it's short for glamping. And like after hearing what this guy has done with this thing,
really?
Glamping, that's glamorous camping.
Oh, this wasn't glamorous.
Well,
come on.
Let me describe it. And maybe for some people it is. First of all, camping out of a car is kind of like glamping when you're not like backpacking.
Yep.
But they modified the interior to just have 2 seats. And I hope that those are the 2 front seats, because it just would have been complicated.
I like to drive from the back seat.
Or drive from a bed. If it wasn't a driverless car, he added a double-sized bed in the back, and I used bed loosely. It was basically like a pallet with like coolers and storage underneath it.
What else do you need?
Well, you need 2 gas tanks to power a stove.
Okay. Check.
A cool thing that they did as they drove around Africa and everywhere else that they ended up going was they had this kind of rule where they only cooked fresh meals based on ingredients that they purchased from local markets. It's not like a bunch of freeze-dried stuff that they just stored up. More trail mix tonight.
Yeah.
34-year-old girl.
Trail mix gets old real quick. Even for 34-year-old women.
So, I mean, it's cool that they really immerse themselves in a cross-continental experience, including the food, which is a big part of it. With storage space. I mean, there's not a lot of room in a G-Wagon when you think about living out of it, but they made the best of it. They had a roof rack with over 400 spare parts on top, because you're gonna break down.
Yeah, you're gonna run into trouble.
And that's the thing I would be most intimidated about, is the breaking down in the middle of the Sahara.
Yeah, I'm not into that. I need a support vehicle.
One thing that helped, I got a kick out of, is they said that they never drove the car over 80 kilometers an hour or 50 miles an hour, which is basically what my father-in-law does always.
Yeah, because once you break 50, it's unsafe.
Well, I think I'm not gonna get into his reasons, because I haven't asked him. It's just one of those things you just don't wanna ask.
But he probably also goes 50 in a 35.
No.
He probably just goes 50 everywhere.
He doesn't, but that's what they did. When you don't have anywhere to be except in your truck for ages, I guess you can do that. Their shower was an inverted water jug that they hung off the side of the car or off a tree. So that's pretty glamorous. And their expenses were about 1,500 euro or dollars a month, which is fuel, food, spare parts, and new water jugs.
That's not bad at all. I'd do that for 1,500 a month. Took him 5 years to get, or it ended up taking him 5 years, just so you know. 18-month plan, leave the boy in boarding school, go for 5 years, drive 62,000 miles around Africa, and then decide, why stop now? There's other continents. So they kept going. They didn't drive to the Americas. They shipped the
G-Wagon,
G-Wagon. You could like get a shipping container and get a barge and pay to have it shipped. Then they drive the Americas.
Did they swim behind it?
I doubt it. They probably flew or boated. Maybe jet skis. I imagine them on one jet ski. Her in the back, him in the front.
Her in the front, man.
And then her in the front sometimes.
She's got that spry young blood.
When they got to America, they drove all over the Americas, both of them. They started in Argentina and then eventually made it all the way to the uppermost parts of Alaska, basically going to every country and every location that you can imagine. It was by the end of 1999, so that only took them like 4 years. Then in 2000, they said, let's go over to Australia. Spent 4 years in Australia. 4 years just driving around Australia. 2005, makes his way up through Asia and Russia, and then unfortunately, Christine, who he had just finally married in 2009 after this classified ad and this trip that had lasted for almost 20 years, she gets cancer and passes away.
Oh no.
2 weeks after she passes away, he takes her kid that he has now adopted, the one they left at boarding school, and brings him along on the trip.
Did this guy write a book? Because this is awesome.
I hope so.
That was sad, but it's still a great story.
They go up through India and into China, and then they become the first foreign vehicle to ever drive across North Korea. They drove across North Korea with help from the German government and from Mercedes, because at this point, Mercedes was like, we gotta support this guy. He's in our car and he's going all over the world.
All right, I've got some of the amazing things that kind of happened or they endured. First of all, he had no technology with him. And only until 2000 did he get a very basic mobile phone. Still no GPS. I can't imagine going around the block without a GPS.
Travel the globe.
Couple of stories. One night in the middle of the Sahara Desert, he and Christine decided to get wild. They said, let's get wild out here, which basically meant popping in a cassette tape of Beethoven's sonata.
That is wild.
I don't know which one. And they just blared it at full volume with no one within 93 miles in all directions. It's kind of cool, but I wouldn't say it's living on the edge. At least not the Beethoven part.
Yeah, what part is exciting about that?
Being isolated and just blaring your devil music.
It could have been like Snoop or something.
He suffered a couple of things. He got streptococcal infection in his ankle that burst open with pus that could have left him footless, but he got it treated.
That's good.
But he dislocated his shoulder, and Christine had to shift the gears as they drove to Nebia to see a doctor. He got malaria 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times.
That's 7.
8. One to grow on. This is what he's quoted as saying. He said, 50% of sickness is sickness. I can't even make sense of this quote. 50% of sickness is sickness you have mentally, he says. You get malaria and mentally you had another malaria, but I cut it by 50%. I take pills, my fever goes down, and the next day the sun is shining again and everything's all right.
This is what happens when you go on a 26-year road trip.
Yeah, some other wheels stop spinning.
Yeah, right.
Other than that, the trip was pretty much worry-free.
Okay. Finally, October of 2014, they end this epic road trip. He returns to Berlin. All in all, he ended up going a total of 556,000 miles through 177 countries over the course of 26 years. To put that into perspective, ended up traveling the equivalent of 22 times around the globe. 22 times around the globe.
Wow.
Or from the Earth to the moon and back, and then 2 circles of the world. That's a long way to drive.
Well, the cool thing was that it was all in one vehicle.
And because of that, Mercedes, again, like I said, got in on this and said, we need to support this guy. They supported him in his trip across North Korea. But then the coolest thing that Mercedes decided to do at the end is they bought Otto from him at the end of this trip, and they paid 450,000 euros, about $475,000, which was his estimate for how much money he had spent out of pocket to go on this trip. So they basically reimbursed him for this entire expense because he had like the coolest, most
that's cool,
immersive ad for a G-Wagon that there ever has been for Mercedes.
There's no profit margin? They just covered his costs?
I'm sure. He's, endorsement deals, man.
Endorsement. Have you heard of him before today?
Nope.
You haven't? I would say that I'm pretty inspired. I mean, this gives me the hankering to go on another road trip, and you're invited.
I think 26 hours maybe. Start there.
Yeah,
Let's do 26
I'm
minutes.
not doing like...
Let's just commute. We commute together. 26 minutes, start small. Got to get a Mercedes, though, and got to get them on board.
G-Wagon. G for gangsta.
Thanks for watching and joining us in our upcoming 26-minute road trip. It'll be a documentary.
Yeah, you know what time it is.
Hey, Mythical Beats. This is Akash.
And this is Ashini.
And we are in Goa, India. And it is time to spin the wheel of mythicality.
Make sure to check out our brand new episode of Ear Biscuits, our podcast. This week's guest is Corridor Digital. Had a great conversation with those guys.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow on this channel, we have an original song biscuit featuring Hannah Hart.
Hannah Hart. Click over to Good Mythical More, where we discuss and reminisce about our road trip stories of the past.
Contemplating sleeping. Sleeping. They call it the little death.
When I contemplate it, I start to feel, well, a little sleepy. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. It's like you tell people about it later and they don't believe it. I mean, a little person in a wheelchair.
Singing karaoke. I want to go back to that place.